Good evening, everyone. We're broadcasting from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, the homeland of the Métis Nation. Tonight, we're here to celebrate Love After the End, an anthology of two-spirit and Indigiqueer speculative fiction published by our good friends at Arsenal Pulp Press. You're in for quite a treat this evening as we have the volume's editor, Joshua Whitehead, here, and we also have contributors Nathan Adler, Minosh Pyle, and David A. Robertson. Following some readings and a bit of a conversation, there'll be a Q&A. You'll notice that right at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A box. So please do feel free to put in questions over the course of the evening. You won't be interrupting anybody, and we'll get to those as soon as the conversation is over and there's time to chat with you out there. I'll be back at the end to go over some exciting book signing procedure. But first, I'm going to introduce your host for the evening and the volume's editor. Joshua Whitehead is an Oji-Cree Nehio, two-spirit Indigiqueer member of Peguis First Nation, Treaty 1. He is the author of the poetry collection Full Metal Indigiqueer, which is fantastic, and was published by Talon Books in 2017, and the heartbreakingly beautiful, funny, and just overall incredible novel Johnny Appleseed, which was also published by Arsenal Pulp Press in 2018, and was longlisted for the Scotiabank Giller Prize. Shortlisted for the Scotiabank Giller Prize, shortlisted for the Governor General's Literary Award for Fiction, the Amazon First Novel Award, the Carol Shields Winnipeg Book Award, the Firecracker Award, and the Indigenous Voices Award. It won a Lambda Literary Award for Gay Fiction and the George Beignet Award for Fiction. He is the winner of the Governor General's History Award for the Indigenous Arts and Story Challenge in 2016, and is working on a PhD in Indigenous Literatures and Cultures in the University of Calgary's English Department on Treaty 7. Please put your virtual hands together for Joshua Whitehead.
Thank you, John. Thank you to McNally first and foremost as well, Arsenal Pulp, you all for joining us this evening, and to my amazing contributors who are also here with us. I was just making the joke that it's so nice to be back in Treaty 1 virtually. And it's a pleasure of mine just to be here and for the first launch of Love After the End, a work that we've been working together with for the better part of a while now. So I'm just going to introduce our contributors. We'll welcome them in. We'll do a little reading, a small sampling of their stories. We'll have a bit of a discussion. And as John noted, we're happy to hear your questions. So fill up that Q&A box if you'd like. But I'd first love to introduce Nathan Adler, who is the author of Wrist, which was out with Kegadon's Press, and editor of Bawajigan Stories of Power with Exile Editions. Nathan has an MFA in creative writing from UBC, is a first place winner of the Indigenous Arts and Stories Challenge, and is a recipient of the Natchin Reveal Indigenous Art Award for Literature. He is Anishinaabe and Jewish, and a member of the Lac des Mille Lacs First Nation. Next, I'm going to introducing Minosh Pyle, who is a two-spirit Métis, and oh my goodness, forgive my Ojibwe here, my Anishinaabe Moen, Bawating Anishinaabe writer, originally from Green Bay, Wisconsin, living in Bara Ota Utunwe, or Minneapolis, Minnesota. They have been published in both creative and scholarly journals such as Prism International, the Transgender Studies Quarterly, Cloud Throat, and the Activist History Review. Their current projects include editing a zine for Two-Spirit Writing, pursuing a PhD on Two-Spirit Anishinaabe history, and as always, learning their ancestral languages. And last but not least, David Robertson, who I'm sure many of you Treaty 1 folks know, is the winner of the Governor General's Literary Award, the Beatrice Monsieur Indigenous Writer of the Year Award, and the John Hirsch Award for Most Promising Manitoba Writer. His books include When We Were Alone, also a winner of the Governor General's Award, a finalist for the TD Canadian Children's Literature Award, and a McNally Robinson Best Book for Young People. Also the author of Will I See, which was the winner of the Manuela Diaz Book Design and Illustration Award, the graphic novel category. Also author of the YA novel Strangers, which was a recipient of the Michael Van Roy Award for Genre Fiction, and Monsters, again, a McNally Robinson Best Book for Young People. Through his writings about Canada's Indigenous people, David educates as well as entertains, reflecting Indigenous cultures, histories, and communities while illuminating many contemporary issues. David is a member of the Norway Cree House Nation and lives in Winnipeg. So let's bring on the contributors. Hello, everybody. I'll get you to unmute and unmic. Hi, my friends.
Hello, Josh.
So happy that we're all here together. We get to share this space. And I would love to hear some readings from you folks. So maybe we'll do a reading first from each of you. We'll start maybe in the order I introduced folks. So Nathan, then Kyle, and then last but not least, Dave. And then we'll just get to gabbing and chatting and talking like old aunties. So first, I'll introduce Nathan, who will read from his amazing short story, Abacus. Oh, Nathan.
Unmute yourself.
You're muted, yeah.
Is that better?
There we go, perfect.
Okay, everyone can hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So yeah, I think I'll read from my story, Abacus. Which is about a bioengineered rat, but I'm going to read just the part with the other main character. Do you know what your name means? Eva brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Diane's mother was standing at the edge of his bed, staring out the porthole. A swirl of stars outside his bedroom windows, smears of light streaking like shooting stars. An antique book made of real paper rested on Diane's chest. Nanobojo stories. The rotation of the space station Marius simulated gravity in the low G's of their orbit, the smears of light repeatedly interrupted by the looming presence of Io's volcanic surface, the hulking mass of Jupiter, Jupiter's smaller moons, Callisto, Europa, and Ganymede flitting across the molded curve of the wall like sprites, satellite of a satellite of a satellite. The space station Marius wasn't actually on Io's surface, too much volcanic activity. The surface compressing and decompressing like a squash ball in the tide of forces, not to mention the radiation. Dayan is an Ojibwe word, you know, short for Indian. It means my home. We named you this because it wasn't until you were born that Io began to feel like home, a home away from home. For Dayan, Io had always been home, but maybe home lost all meaning when Earth was supposed to be home, though he never stepped foot on that world. His parents both worked in the organic tech industry, a lucky spoiled space brat his cousin Asa teased from Earth when they VR'd across the distances. Distance meant very little in virtual space. Diane wasn't so sure about his fortune, though. He thought they were the lucky ones. The earth is our mother, Eva whispered. She folded hair across his temple, kissed his forehead, then turned to the door. She touched palm to sensor to dim the lights, then stepped out of his room, leaving only the blue glow from the track lighting around his window. He had a habit of staring out at space from every nearest viewpoint, searching for a glimpse of Earth, no brighter than a star, a distant blue orb, the stuff of imagination and hollow series. Though his earthbound relations dreamed of this adventure of space living, Diane dreamed of being an earthling one day. He imagined the vastness of the ocean, a real blue sky overhead, wind, rain, snow, so many things he'd never experienced. If the earth is our mother and the moon is our grandmother, what does that make Io? What does that make Jupiter? Eva paused in the doorway. Relatives too, aunties, uncles, cousins. They've always watched over us, just like Debickises, just like Nokomis. Diane supposed this was true. The sun and moon had always hovered in the sky, exerting the subtle influences of gravity and astrology. He tried to figure out his astrological sign once based on the month and year of his birth, but wasn't sure if those old superstitions applied. He would need a whole new Jovian Ionian astrological system to chart the subtle dance of the galaxy. Not that he believed in any of that, Shkigum, slime. I guess I'll just leave it there.
Perfect. Thank you, Nathan. I have much to talk about, but we'll get to the the other readings first, so everyone has a small sampling of the beauty that these folks are sharing with us tonight. I love Diane so much, so I can't wait to chat. I would next like to introduce Kai, who will be reading from their story as well. An amazing guidebook on how to survive the apocalypse. So I'll hand it over to you, Kyle.
So my story is called How to Survive the Apocalypse for Native Girls. The only thing I think that you probably need to know for this section is there's 3 characters. The main character, whose name is Nigigue, Nigigue's girlfriend, whose name is Shanae, and their friend Migize. So I'll just read, and it's the story is in numbered sections. So this is the beginning of section 8. Shanae and I talked for a long time after I got back to Miskoziibing. I told her about this book that I'm writing, and she had some suggestions. So here are her ideas. Shanae's suggestion number 1. Everyone has ancestors, but not everyone knows theirs. This is very wise, I think. I know most of my ancestors going way back because of the old papers from the nation and from the government that existed before the nation. But because of the border wars, some people don't have those records, like Shanae. And some people, like Mikize, don't have cookums to tell them the stories. Shanae's suggestion number 2. She thinks I should talk more about kinship. Shanae is a little bitter about kinship, like Mikize, except she has even more reason to be bitter since her grandma was originally rejected from the nation. See, when the borders broke, people decided that kinship should be our main law instead. Except the problem was that kinship means different things to different people. And sometimes people who should see each other as kin, Inouye Magan, reject each other. That's what happened to Shanae's grandma until one of the clan leaders adopted her. Shanae's suggestion number 3. You talk a lot about Mikize. That's what she said. I think she means I talk too much about Mikize. When she said this to me, I felt my face harden. It was the opposite of melting. What is wrong with talking about Mikize? I asked her. She made an expression that was sad and disappointed and fond at the same time. Nigigue, she told me, you have to move on. Talking about Mikize all the time isn't going to bring them back. Mikize isn't dead, I said to her. Her face became pinched like she had bitten a lemon, which is a fruit I tasted once recently, which is very tart. Then she rubbed her eyes very hard, and when she looked up again, I could see that there were some tears there. Mikize was my best friend, but I forget sometimes that other people love them too. Shanae took my hand in her hand and squeezed. Nigigue, she said again, you have to learn to live with what is here now. You have to just be. Section 9. Sorry about the noise. Sometimes love is not so good. When that happens, kinship can sometimes help and sometimes it can hurt. That is what happened to Mikize. I still don't know when Mikize was born, but I know they came of age around the time I was born, during the Bukadang. We call that time the Hunger Years, not just because people often went without enough food, but also because there was another kind of hunger. The kind of hunger that causes people to do terrible things. Weendigo hunger. Here is a teaching about Weendigo for you. Weendigo are more than just cannibals. They are possessed by a hunger that only increases every time they try to fill it. That hunger can be for anything. Food, drugs, sex, love, but most of all, power. Mikize's parents were the kind of people who were infected by the Weendigo spirit of the Bukadang. Mikize never talked about it, not even with me, but they had scars on their hands and arms like burn marks. They wore long sleeves to cover them most days, but they stood out if you noticed them, still faintly redder than the brown of Mikize's skin. Once, when I first met Mikize, I asked them where they grew up. Mikize's eyes went a little blurry, like they were looking far into the distance. Their breath turned shallow and their whole body tensed. They reminded me of how deer react when they spot you in the woods with a gun. I stood still, as though my own sudden moves might scare Mikize just like one of those deer. A place that doesn't exist anymore, Mikize said finally, their breath starting to deepen again. Where did it go? I asked. I was just a kid and didn't know how to read the words in Mikize's face. For a long moment, I didn't think Mikize was going to answer me. They were still staring ahead, not looking at me, their lips held tightly shut. But then they said, very quietly, It was consumed by Windigug, and they refused to say anything else. I'll stop there. Miigwech, Marcy, thank you for listening.
Hi, thank you. When I was first reading your stories and when we first got them and then editing them, I was like, I'm taking notes because the apocalypse is here. And we're gonna survive. And this is how. And Cookums are featured very prominently in that, but so I'm excited to talk about that too. And last, I'll bring in Dave to share some stories from Eloise.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Kai and Nathan, for your readings. Hello, everybody. I just want to say, I know Marjorie Poor is watching. Marjorie comes to every single book launch in the history of the world, and she's here for this one. And that's just very Marjorie of Marjorie. Hi, Marjorie. Hi, everybody. So this short story, Eloise, is actually, so the first book, Love Beyond Body, Space, and Time, had a story in it. I forget what it's called now, but it was with the same character. So Eloise is actually a sequel to that short story. So I wanted to kind of challenge myself to continue on that story from a different perspective. And so I'm just going to read the first couple pages from it, and yeah, enjoy. Okay. Cassie's eyes flutter open, and she can see a beam of sunlight crossing a room at a 45-degree angle, from a rogue crack in her blackout blinds all the way to the pine baseboard that her bedroom carpet is tucked under. She stares at the beam and watches dust particles dance within it like embers around a campfire, like they hear music that nobody else can hear, like they know something beautiful that she does not. She used to know in a dream, but it's slipping away with each passing moment. She slides her hand out from underneath the sheets, places it against her cheek, and runs her fingertip across her skin, like it might tell her what she knew once, what she knew seconds ago. Like every translucent follicle of hair is a letter in Braille. Then she holds her hand out, washes it in the beam of light, and moves her fingers as though she's never seen them before, as though they're dancing with the particles of dust, like she can hear the music, like she can remember something beautiful. Her skin is milky smooth and unblemished. It wasn't always this way. In the dream, sitting on the bed, smelling sterility and death, her skin was loose as though melting away, her veins thick with the brevity of life, and the lines, all those lines burrowed deep within her flesh. There was another hand, its fingers cross-hatched with hers, a shade of olive contrasted against her own pinkish white. It was a lovely pattern. Cassie's fingers locked within hers, Emma's. You silly girl, Cassie says, repeating words, the only 3 words she can remember from the dream, like lyrics to the song that the particles were dancing to, the song that nobody else can hear. Silly of me, Cassie thinks, to keep dreaming of Emma. So many months after they'd met, so many months of waiting for Emma to call, so many months of disappointment. The dream is always the same. And this is the only reason why Cassie is able to remember anything about it. She has taken images from one night, others from a different night, and so on, and pieced them together like a jigsaw puzzle to form something of a memory, and then has, in turn, dissected the meaning of it. Why do I keep dreaming about her? Cassie had asked her mother one morning, when the dream had become a part of her routine, like showering, brushing her teeth, dressing, breathing. Does it matter? Of course it matters. If she didn't call you, Cass, do you think she wants you to call her? I was talking about the dream, Mum. Do you think she dreams about you? Cassie held the phone away from her ear for a moment and fought the urge to throw it against the wall. We're always old. She's dying and I'm old. And as soon as she dies, I wake up. What do you think that means? Cassie sighed. She had held her breath in until sighing, and now expelled all of it in one fell swoop. that we're dead and I should shut up. Maybe you were never anything. Cassie hung up the phone, thinking that her meeting with Emma, though fleeting, had meant everything. But now the moment is gone, and the echoes of it is haunting her while she sleeps. Echoes of a life that never happened, from a moment that did. Why? The radio turns on at precisely at 8 a.m., Cassie's alarm clock. She is always awake before her alarm clock. Her dreams are her alarm clock. Her dreams are not timed well. Her dreams are entirely inconvenient. Cassie pushes herself up and sits at the side of her bed, her naked feet dangling close to the carpet, her toes brushing against the fabric. She reaches out with both hands, stops when her hands are awash in the shaft of light, cups them, then pulls them towards her body, like she can bring the light with her, like she can wash her body in it, her eyes, her mouth, her hair, her heart, like the sunbeam is smoke billowing from a smudge bowl. Thank you.
Thank you. It's just like very exciting for me to hear the stories in your voices, because I've been working with them and with you folks for like better part of like 2 years now. So I just feel like the proudest little auntie that these things are animate and alive. So first, I guess I would like to ask, like, I think we're living in a really obviously tumultuous times under COVID-19, but also that's a larger history that we have, I think, as like Indigenous folks since first contact. We're coming up on Thanksgiving Day or Columbus Day, which is now National Indigenous Peoples Day. And we're like surviving a lot of basically kind of cultural genocide acts throughout both US and Canada right now, from the Kumeyaay of the South through to the East Coast Mi'kmaq fishermen as well. So I just remember I was just finished watching the first episode of Trickster, and I was like, I'm so excited to see like an Indigenous film written by an Indigenous writer with Indigenous actors. And I think this book, when I was a kid, like when I was a youth, I would have so desperately needed a book about Two-Spirit literature. So I guess my first question to folks is like thinking about like kinship and like two-spiritedness. What does it mean to you, or like why did you feel compelled to write about that topic or under those circumstances?
I guess I'll go first. I think I had written a story for the first collection, Love Beyond, and that one I knew it was specifically queer anthologies, two-spirit anthology. So I wrote a story specifically for that, and then but my writing deals with those issues and topics already, so I didn't have to like try very. Yeah. That's what I write already, so it wasn't like. But I wrote that story in here specifically for the anthology, and when I knew this one was coming out, I thought, okay, well, I knew they wanted it to be sci-fi, so it's not a genre I've really written a lot in. So I've like that was the stretch, and so I wrote this story specifically for the anthology. But I've written other like fantasy and urban fantasy where it's you're still doing that world building kind of that. So I was actually surprised that I could do it. I'm like, hey, I can write sci-fi. I mean, I read enough of it, but for some reason I had this like, but yeah. So I wrote the kind of story that I would have like loved to read when I was a kid, like this really like queer, gay, positive kind of like story where the characters are living their lives, and that's not even what the issues they're facing, right? The issue is that he wants to date an AI. That's the problem. So that the future is different, and they've overcome all our backwardness, or some of our backwardness at least. So I was imagining a future where there's still thriving Indigenous cultures and peoples and who speak their language and practice their cultures, and they're just in this different future, but and they're still there. And then so I was imagining that future world, and then also the queer positive space and the stories that I would have loved to have had been in existence when I was younger, but they didn't exist when I was a teenager. So I'm happy this book is out there now.
Me too. And I think like under COVID-19, we should all be dating AIs right now. It's about all we can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just would say, to me, like I'm cognizant of the fact that this is like an Own Voices story for me, but it's also not an Own Voices story for me. And I wanted to, first of all, I wanted to honor a marginalized group of people that I dearly love. And the Two-Spirited community is a group of people that I feel very connected to and that I feel very dearly for. And I also know that I expected of myself to do the sort of give the sort of effort to the story and work that I would expect others to give if they're going to write stories that aren't from their own lived experience. And so I was very aware of that as I wrote it. And it was something that I thought a lot about in both stories that I wrote for both anthologies. I think, as kind of Nathan alluded to, I think it's important for, first of all, in general, Indigenous people to be able to read stories where they are the heroes of those stories, where they have agency, where they have, well-developed backgrounds and lives, and that they have power. And that was important for me to know that Indigenous people will be able to see themselves in these characters. And also that non-Indigenous readers will be able to have a window through which to view well drawn out characters that are represented truthfully in literature. And then I think also for Two-Spirited Indigenous people to read this story, I think that it's important for them to also see stories that are being written that have also that representation for them. I think that's empowering. And so, and then, the story itself, I wanted to write a story where two characters could just feel this incredible pull and love for each other. That, I don't think that needs any sort of explanation or that feels any different from any other sort of love. And I think that was also something that I wanted to do in the story. I wanted Cassie and Emma to just have this incredible love for each other, and longing for each other that is no different from the longing that anybody feels for anybody that they love. And so I think that is also important to be able to have a story like that. And then I just love Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And so the construct of the story is like the construct itself of the story is just like this kind of really cool kind of sci-fi concept that aside from all the kind of serious stuff that I loved playing in that world and living in that world. And I wrote this story because like I loved Cassie and Emma, and I wanted to return to those characters and just to see where they were at and what happened with this kind of machine, this kind of program that had started in the first story, and where it was at and what it would do, how it would kind of infiltrate the world and the psyche of our society, and how people would use it. So I thought that was also interesting to just see like kind of like what that program, I think it's called The Gate, would do in this world. So it's kind of like it's all of that.
Yeah. No, and I think like Eloise is a perfect example as someone who like doesn't identify as Two-Spirit in any of its senses, but also like imbues it with such an ethics and a morality of how to research and how to write this well. So I thank you for that. And I keep thinking of The Gate. I'm like, that's like TikTok to me. So I'm like 2 hours later, still scroll. It's very easy to get stuck in.
Yeah, there's some like elements that kind of reflect like real life. Where'd the time go? For sure.
And Kai, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I resonate a lot with what both of you guys have said. For me, I honestly can't think of the last time I wrote a story that is about a cisgender straight character. It's just like I just don't write those stories, and I mean, those characters exist in my stories, but they're not usually the main characters. So that part of it was like very just it just went very natural and for me. And like with the sci-fi aspect of it as well, I also write a lot of alternate histories and a lot of like indigenous futurisms, because I'm really interested in exploring what our communities can look like or could look like in different circumstances or in future circumstances. And one of the things that I like really wanted to get at with this story is like the idea that things they don't have to be either like a perfect future world or a terrible future world. Like obviously this story takes place after the apocalypse, as the title says, but all the characters speak Anishinaabe. It takes place in a future where the language has totally come back, and it takes place in a world where the main character had a feast to celebrate her coming out, but it also takes place in a world that her best friend was very violently harmed because of their two-spirit identity. And so I just am really interested in exploring those kind of futures because I think the world is like not, we're not going to probably have a utopia, and at the same time, even in a dystopia, there are like spots of joy and stuff that we experience as Indigenous and two-spirit people.
Oh yeah, I think your story is really wrought with that, of like trying to find if there ever is a balance between like utopic and dystopic. And as you're saying, like Anishinaabe Moan has returned, and these cultural ceremonies have also returned, but then there's still like, and your story is specifically, which is, I think is really important to have in this collection, because you're also dealing with Afro-Indigeneity too. So like, yeah, there's still like wrought kind of discontinuities in this world, I would say at the same time. But you write a lot about like kinship, and one of your rules is if you want to survive the apocalypse, you got to bring your cookum or your grandmother, right? Yeah, did you maybe want to talk about? Yeah, like I guess because the grandmothers in this story of yours are like basically kind of like the last line of defense against a lot of things, but also embodies kind of the whole concept of kinship as you talk about in this text, right? So yeah, interested like in what ways, because I would say like both Dave and Nathan's are really kind of dealing with like technology, be it virtual reality with Nathan, or this kind of uploading program, The Gate with Dave. But yours, I would say, like what I'm thinking is that you are conceptualizing like kinship too as a type of technology. So yeah, I guess my question to you, Kai, is just like, yeah, what like did you want to maybe just like unpack a little bit about like what kinship means in the story, but also like what we can take from that?
Yeah, I like that way of thinking about it, kinship as a technology. I've often thought about like conceptualizing our two-spirit survival strategies as technology. So I think kinship is definitely like one of those. And I wrote this story in part because I wanted to try to grapple with the fact that kinship is like first it's like a really powerful presence in our lives as Indigenous people, but it has its ups and downs. And so in this story, there's kinship with a capital K that Nigig talks about, which is like sort of the new way that the community is ruling, is like governing itself. But throughout the story, the characters sort of see how for some members of the community, kinship falls short of doing them justice. And so I'm not sure I come to a conclusion in the story and I still am struggling with it, as a person, but yeah, like there's a lot of like, for me, like, especially, this story focuses on Anishinaabe communities, but like also as a Métis person, we don't necessarily have we have like formal governing structures, and we've had formal governing structures in the past, but for me, the real nuts and bolts of how our communities are held together are, like you said, with the Cookums. And so it's like about the relationships that two-spirit people build with each other. It's about the relationships that we have with our grandmothers and our elders. and the people that we like really share our lives with on like a day-to-day basis. And while our governing structures are also important, we can't lose sight of like that, those like really strong, important interpersonal relations.
Definitely. Yeah, I love that. I was just thinking about technology and kinship. And I also would say towards the end of your story, like you also, in thinking about two-spiritedness and survival in that sense, we also are like elders in the making at an earlier age, I would say. So yeah, kinship tech, love it. And speaking of technology, with Nathan and David, you both have a fascination with some type of VR. With Nathan's, it's phonetically spelled out VE-AR, and then with Dave's, you have the gate. So did you want to like, how does technology, like, why did you come up to maybe these kind of virtual realities? Like, why did that kind of formulate? Specifically with Dave's, because I'm like, really want to go into the gate. And I was also like, I also want to kind of date this really cute like rat VR person. And with Nathan's story, so you're like, what does technology in your stories mean?
I think with mine, I was just trying to think of like what the future might look like. I was just thinking like people like little cuddly pets and things, and I could imagine a future where computers don't look like computers anymore. They look like pets because people like pets, and then it just seems like something that might happen in my own mind, at least. I'm like, people are going to just have personal AI because people have Alexa and all these other weird personal home computing devices, but I imagine in the future those will just become like pets that people love, and then they'll want them to be cute and cuddly like an animal. So that's where I was thinking. But then I was thinking these things would get like so intelligent and smart they'd become like people almost. And then the VR, again, that was just like something I was imagining as being possible because I knew it had to be in the future. So and the rat thing was just when I was a kid, I really liked reading books with talking animal, like talking rats in particular. For some reason, like The Secrets of Nim. I like that. I loved that when I was a kid. I read all those rats that escape a scientific experiment, and now they're super intelligent. And I loved that when I was a kid. And and I knew we wanted the book sort of geared to or accessible at least to youth as well. So that's what I was thinking. I want to make something that that a younger person, my younger self, would have just like loved. So that's what I was thinking. And then the technology was just like me trying to imagine what the future might look like, whether, and that's where I was coming from.
Yeah, I was very obsessed with the Redwall series. So like rats and mice were always big for me too. And then Abacus, I'm like, can my mouse just be a cute little like mouse technology too?
Yeah. I also read lots of science articles, and sometimes you read articles about like how they create like organic computers and weird things like that. So I think I was drawing inspiration from like current kind of like speculative science articles that I read.
Yeah, but I would say it's like very rooted too, because when speaking about Abacus, and this is a quote from the story, and Abacus is saying like, I am my ancestors' wildest dream come true. How about that? Rats were first. So it's like in this, and then also no Ojibwe rat in space with indigenous folks at the same time. Yeah, I was just interested that you think about when you were crafting Abacus and choosing the rat as an avatar, was that also thinking about like histories of indigeneity as well? Like, yeah, I'm just like curious how you kind of conceptualize or like why did Abacus become a rat besides your fascination with science and these texts?
I guess mostly with just that I like those stories of like the talking rats, but I guess that's the main reason. But the other thing I was imagining was like that in the future, I'm imagining indigenous people surviving and thriving in the future. So then imagining where they would fit into this tech industry that this relatively successful tech industry. Everyone wants their cuddly whatever AI pet / computer. So in the future, where Anishinaabe people going to be? Are they going to be on the space station helping produce rats that are going to perpetuate our culture, right? Like there's a lot of Indigenous people involved in VR and 360 and all those new digital technologies. I know people that are working in those fields, and they're creating really stunning work. Like Jean Marshall just did her VR project for Nuit Blanche, and it was all this beadwork, her beadwork designs, and it was like, it looks like a spacecraft, and it's just floating over Lake Superior in front of the island of like of Nanabojo there in the background, and it's like a stunning piece. So I imagine the future people are going to want technologies like AIs that are going to reflect their culture. So they'll be embedded so they'll need people in those places to develop that tech. So that's what I was thinking for that.
I love that. I'm gonna have to get this name of this beadwork artist after.
Jean Marshall.
Jean Marshall. Okay. I encourage everyone to check it out too. And then Dave, did you want to talk a little bit about the gate?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is one of my favorite movies of all time is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And I love how they used the construct of that technology to frame a relationship. In that case, Joel and Clementine, but that's why I named the story Eloise. I mean, it's not in a poem. It's Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is a line in a poem called Eloisa to Abelard, I think, by Alexander Pope, I believe. And so I wanted to kind of pay a little homage to that story and how it's influenced me. I love stories that play with technology in that way. I love time travel stories too. So I love like that sort of technology, or that kind of the construct of storytelling in those areas. I think it's really interesting. The gate is, really, it's allegorical, and I think it's probably overtly, allegorical, and how it, it talks about our obsession with technology and how we escape into it and lose time, just like how you referenced. I mean, that's exactly what I was trying to kind of show with it. But also like how, we can use it for either to disconnect or connect, right? Like, I mean, so like this in this story, the gate is used as a way to disconnect from reality. But also it's a way that Cassie and Emma have found each other. It's kind of reached through into reality and helped them to connect and to bring each other together, as much as they've been using it to try, and at least Emma in this story, to try and tear herself apart from the pain of an unrequited love. It's also kind of brought them, in the end, it kind of not to give away the ending, but it kind of pulls them together because the strength of that love has reached beyond that tech and into their real lives. And I love that. I love playing in that world. I love playing with that idea, and how we can use the different ways that we can interpret technology and use technology within the logic of this world. And so that's what, like, so the gate is, if anyone doesn't know, the gate is where you can, like, you plug in with like patches from like an app on your phone, and you can like live 5,000 years in like 5 minutes, and then you can either escape from death, or you can teach a kid manners, or you can like forget somebody. And so that's kind of like the whole idea of the gate, and I use it in different ways in both stories, but in particular in the sequel story with Eloise.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because when I was reading, I'm like, I really want to go in the gate, and then there's like a scene where like it's child rearing. It's like, go in the gate. He's like, I know that's gonna be 50 years. I was like, oh, this is torturous.
I know. That's a very like unsettling actually scene. Like it's almost like a horror scene in a way, because you have the kid is terrified, and he knows that. Like he goes in this gate to get like kind of like boarding school sent away to like learn manners and to learn, to kind of like, and in that way it kind of references as well like the residential school system, and how this kid is being taken away from his mom to have his identity stripped from him, you know, and so these little subtle kind of nuances to the story that I kind of tried to work in, but he returns a completely different kid. And so he's gone for like seconds in the real world, and in the gate he's lived, you know, years. And he's completely come back unrecognizable to his mother, and I'm sure his mother is unrecognizable to him. And so I think with any good story, you can read it to be entertained, but there's a lot underneath the surface that you can pull from and dive into and pick apart and dissect and think and learn a bit from as well. So
definitely. Yeah, like you all have like all your stories are both entertaining, but like richly full of metaphor and decolonial tactics and imagined futures. And I think like technology, like in the introduction I wrote, like we live in this hyper cyber res sphere, and many of us have met digitally and virtually. And so it is beautiful. It does create kinship and community at the same time. So I'm so very grateful that you were here. We are running out of time, so maybe I'll take one question, which I see here. So this is for all of the contributors. What do you think a good short story does or can do? How do you hope readers will approach your work?
I'll just say quickly, I think a short story can do anything any other story can do. Like, you know, and I think what I love about the short story, I guess, form is that you have to be so focused in your storytelling. I think it kind of like it requires you to focus your work and the propulsiveness of your narrative, I think, because you don't have time for any secondary crap. Which secondary crap is good if you're doing a novel, but like with a short story, you just have like one singular focus, and that momentum has to carry you to that end and to whatever you want to say. So I think it can do anything. I think I like it because it's stripped down, concentrated way to storytell. And I really, you know, some of my favorite books are short story collections. You know, I love 9 Stories by J.D. Salinger is one of my favorite story collections. And In Our Time by Ernest Hemingway, I love that collection as well. And really that's this collection, they're both thematically linked short story collections, which I really love. And so I really enjoyed, and my first novel is really a collection of short stories too, The Evolution of Alice. It's a collection of really directly linked or thematically linked stories. And so I love writing within the form of short stories. I think it's very challenging, and it helps me to focus my storytelling. So anyway, that's what I think.
Yeah, brevity is not my forte, so I can't really do short stories. So I appreciate those who can.
I only started writing short stories because I wrote a novel, and then after the novel, I was I just couldn't start another one. I was just like, okay, I'm gonna write something. So I'm like, okay, I'll write something short. I love reading them, but so for a while, all I was doing was writing short stories, and then I was reading a lot of short stories, and I was getting really used to the form, and I was going to UBC studying writing, and I was getting all this feedback on. And most people were workshopping short stories because they're easier format to work with rather than a longer narrative. You can't look at it all in class. But so I learned a lot about the short story form and from that. And so you have like a really tight space to get your arc. And it's, you don't have as much fat. You got to have just like very bare bones compared to a novel. And it's very similar to like a film script like that. It's much more precise, I find. And my favorite kind of idea was the Chekhov's gun kind of idea. Like all the elements in the story have to serve a purpose. So if it's there, it's going to have like a reason that it's there. Otherwise, you don't have room for it. So you got to throw it out.
Kill your darlings sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also pretty new to the short story form. I really think in novel length, like novel, like just format. That's how the plots that come to my mind. But I've been trying to write short stories more recently because I also just really struggle with the discipline it takes to write like a whole novel. So for me, short stories are like a really fun way to where some people are like super into like exploring how technology, you know, would affect the future. For me, it's about like exploring how like history and culture sort of will develop. And so like I'm like a big socio-cultural studies nerd kind of a person. So I like short stories because I can jump into a different world, and I don't have to commit to that world necessarily, like world building a whole novel worth of stuff to it, but I can just like try out a different concept in each short story. So that's what I like to do with them.
Oh, I love that. Well, you all were wildly successful. I just want to say thanks again for contributing to this and having discussions with me and sharing your stories and giving Indigenous folks, Two-Spirit folks, Indigenous youth pathways into futures that we are and will be a part of. So I really have nothing but the highest respect for you all. Thank you, and I love you, my friends. So check out Love After the End. We have 3 amazing contributors here. I can't wait for you to read their stories. And I'm just gonna pass things back to John, who has some last-minute announcements to make. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Miigwech.
Hello, everyone. I'm the one who comes in after all the entertaining, informative, and incredibly interesting discussion and just goes over naked capitalism. So I will point out that Love After the End is available at McNally Robinson Booksellers. We do have copies that are signed by the volume's editor, Joshua Whitehead, that are available. We deliver in Winnipeg. We deliver across Canada. And you can order online or call us or come in and visit us in person. We're very approachable. I'd like to thank everybody out there for joining us here this evening. I'd also like to thank all the contributors, David Robertson, Minosh Pyle, Nathan Adler, and of course, the editor, Joshua Whitehead, for taking this time to talk about the collection. It really is a beautiful volume of really, really interesting and varied stories, and I'd encourage you all to go check it out. Thank you again to Arsenal Pulp Press for publishing this book, and to all of you, have a lovely night. Thank you again.